The 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge originated from northeastern Scotland rather than southwest Wales.
For the first time in history, ground-penetrating radar has scanned deep beneath the fields surrounding Stonehenge. And what researchers found buried near those 5,000-year-old stones has reopened a mystery archaeologists thought they'd already solved. The radar pulses traveled into the earth and returned with images of something nobody expected, something enormous, and something the monument's builders may never have intended anyone to notice again. When the results first came together on Professor Vincent Gaffney's screen in 2015, his team realized they were looking at roughly 20 large pits arranged in a rough circle more than 1.5 miles across, centered near Durrington Walls, a massive henge enclosure about 2 miles northeast of Stonehenge itself. This is what the imaging actually revealed, and why the honest picture is stranger and more carefully argued than the mystery alone. The buried ring. The team wasn't hunting for something this large. The Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, a multi-year international collaboration led by the University of Bradford alongside the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute in Vienna, had been systematically mapping the wider landscape since 2010 using magnetometry, ground-penetrating radar, and other non-invasive geophysical tools, precisely so archaeologists could study what lay underground without disturbing a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Most of what they expected to find was routine: old post holes, small pits, scattered traces of settlement. Instead, in June 2020, the team announced what they were calling the largest prehistoric monument ever discovered in Britain, published jointly by researchers from Bradford, St Andrews, Birmingham, Warwick, and University College Dublin. The shafts themselves are striking on their own terms. Each is roughly 10 meters wide and at least 5 meters deep, cut directly into the chalk bedrock. When plotted on a map, they trace an arc, not quite a perfect unbroken circle, since erosion, plowing, and incomplete surveying have obscured some sections, but a clearly deliberate, roughly circular boundary more than 2 kilometers in circumference, enclosing an area of over 3 square kilometers, large enough to contain Durrington Walls and several other monuments within it. Dr. Richard Bates of the University of St Andrews, one of the project's lead geophysicists, has described the alignment as showing a level of intentional planning that surprised even researchers accustomed to Neolithic engineering. Radiocarbon dating of material recovered from one of the shafts places its digging at around 2400 BC, meaning the ring was likely dug during the same broad period Stonehenge itself was being rebuilt in its most famous sarsen stone phase. What the shafts were actually for is still genuinely debated. The excavation team's leading interpretation, published in the journal Internet Archaeology, is that they may have functioned as a boundary, marking the edge of a sacred zone around Durrington Walls, perhaps meant to be seen, sensed, or simply known about, rather than walked. It's a real, significant discovery. But it was only the beginning of what the wider radar survey turned up. Across the surrounding landscape, the same Hidden Landscapes project mapped dozens of previously undocumented features: buried pits, ditches, and long-vanished timber structures, including the remains of massive wooden post circles at sites like Durrington Walls' southern circle, some of which rivaled the scale of the standing stones themselves. The stones you see when you visit Stonehenge, in other words, were never the whole monument. They were the visible core of a ceremonial landscape that extended for miles in every direction. And what the radar found directly beneath and around the stone circle's interior would turn out to matter just as much. What the stones do to sound. For decades, visitors walking inside the stone circle reported something hard to put into words. A strange heaviness in the air, a low resonance they couldn't quite place. For a long time, most researchers treated this as atmosphere and imagination, the natural effect of standing inside a famous ancient monument. Then, in 2019 and 2020, acoustic engineer Trevor Cox at the University of Salford decided to actually test it. Cox's team built a 1:12 scale acoustic model of Stonehenge using 3D printed replicas of all 157 stones believed to have stood at the monument during its most complete phase around 2200 BC, based on decades of archaeological survey data about stone positions. They placed the model inside an anechoic chamber, a space engineered to eliminate virtually all outside noise and echo, allowing them to measure with real precision how sound actually moved through the structure. The results, published in 2020 in the journal Acoustics, showed the fully reconstructed circle had a mid-frequency reverberation time of about 0.64 seconds. Comparable, Cox noted, to the acoustics of a modern lecture theater or a small concert hall. Speech and music inside the circle would have carried with a warmth and presence that open grassland simply doesn't produce. Step outside the ring, and that effect would have dropped away almost immediately. That's a genuinely documented finding, peer-reviewed and specific. Where the story gets more speculative is in a separate strand of research by archaeoacoustics specialist Rupert Till, who has studied the acoustic behavior of the bluestones themselves, the smaller stones transported from Wales, and noted that many of them ring with a clear, almost bell-like tone when struck, a property long remembered in local Welsh folklore about the Source region, an area of the Preseli Hills sometimes associated with the old place name Maen Clochog, meaning ringing stones. Till and others have raised the possibility that the stone arrangement could theoretically generate infrasound, vibration below the range of conscious hearing, which some studies, including a widely cited 2003 investigation by physiologist Vic Tandy, have linked to feelings of unease or awe in enclosed spaces. It's worth being precise here. This connection remains a hypothesis researchers have proposed and are still testing, not a confirmed measured effect at Stonehenge itself. The acoustic reverberation findings are solid, published science. The infrasound and emotion link is a serious, testable idea, not yet proven fact. Either way, the acoustic modeling forced researchers to reconsider how much deliberate engineering had gone into a monument long assumed to be little more than stacked rock. And that reconsideration would deepen dramatically once geologists turned their attention to where the stones had actually come from. A journey no one thought possible. The acoustic discoveries raised an obvious question. If the builders understood sound this precisely, what else had been underestimated about them? The answer arrived in August 2024, and it landed as one of the biggest Stonehenge stories in decades. A research team led by Anthony Clark at Curtin University in Australia had been analyzing the altar stone, the large recumbent sandstone slab lying at the monument's heart, long assumed, based on older 1990s geological work, to have come from the old red sandstone region near the Wales-England border. Using high-precision mass spectrometry at the John de Laeter Centre, Clark's team dated tiny mineral grains, zircon, rutile, and apatite crystals, trapped within stone fragments, measuring their age and isotope signatures individually rather than relying on bulk rock comparison. The results were unambiguous and, when checked against an independent laboratory, repeatable. The mineral ages clustered around 1,000 to 2,000 million years old and roughly 450 to 470 million years old, a combination that matches almost uniquely to the Orcadian Basin rock sequences of northeastern Scotland, over 700 kilometers from Stonehenge, a distance confirmed and published in the journal Nature in August 2024. Dr. Robert Eichser of University College London, who had spent decades researching Stonehenge's geology and had co-authored the earlier Welsh origin theory himself, publicly described the finding as genuinely surprising, telling reporters at the time that it fundamentally changed the accepted picture of the stone's origin. The implications, laid out by Professor Chris Kirkland, one of the study's co-authors, are significant. Moving a stone weighing an estimated 6 tons over 700 kilometers across Neolithic Britain by land, through dense forest, unbridged rivers, and boggy terrain, would have been extraordinarily difficult. The team's leading hypothesis is that the altar stone was moved primarily by sea, hauled along the coastline on capable vessels, which would represent some of the earliest confirmed evidence for organized long-distance maritime transport of a heavy cargo anywhere in Neolithic Europe. This wasn't an isolated case. The Preseli Hills of Wales supplied the bluestones, quarried from outcrops including Carn Goedog, identified through matching rock chemistry by Ixer and colleague Richard Bevans. The enormous sarsen stones came from the Marlborough Downs in Wiltshire, confirmed through chemical sourcing published by a team including David Nash in 2020. And now the altar stone traces to Scotland. Each material was sourced from a different region, transported across genuinely difficult distances, at a time roughly 1,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza reached completion. Bevans has described the overall picture as evidence of a society with long-distance connections and logistical organization far beyond what earlier generations of archaeologists assumed Neolithic Britain was capable of. But knowing where the stones came from only sharpened the real question: why go to such extraordinary lengths for these particular stones, from these particular places? Part of the answer, researchers argue, lies in the sky. Reading the sky in stone. Everyone knows about the summer solstice alignment and the sunrise that each June lines up with the monument's main axis, drawing thousands of visitors who gather before dawn to watch it happen. That alignment has been documented since the 1700s and remains one of the best established facts about the site. But it's not the only one, and it may not even be the primary one. Archaeoastronomers, including work associated with English heritage and researchers like Dr. Amanda Chadburn, have long pointed to Stonehenge's equally strong alignment with the winter solstice sunset, arguably the more significant orientation, since the monument's main axis works in both directions, and midwinter held major ceremonial importance for the builders based on evidence of feasting deposits found nearby. Beyond the solstices, some of the site's stone settings appear to relate to the major lunar standstill, a genuine astronomical event occurring on an 18.6-year cycle, when the moon's rising and setting points reach their most extreme range along the horizon. The most recent major standstill occurred through 2024 and into 2025, and English heritage-supported researchers did travel to the site during this window to document how moonlight and shadow interacted with the stones, treating it as a rare opportunity to test long-standing theories about lunar alignments first proposed by astronomer C. A. Peter Newham in the 1960s, and later examined more rigorously by researchers including Clive Ruggles. None of this required writing, in the sense we'd recognize it, but it did require something else: sustained, intergenerational observation. Tracking a cycle that takes nearly 2 decades to complete and building it into permanent stone architecture implies a transmission of astronomical knowledge across multiple human lifetimes, a level of organized, long-term record-keeping that earlier 20th century archaeology was often reluctant to credit Neolithic societies with possessing at all. That reluctance itself has a history. For decades, mainstream archaeology, shaped by dismissive Victorian-era assumptions about primitive prehistoric peoples, resisted astronomical interpretations of Stonehenge, treating them as fringe speculation. It's only in the last few decades, aided by tools like GPR survey and precise isotope dating, that this picture has been taken more seriously and tested rigorously rather than dismissed outright. Astronomical sophistication alone, though, doesn't explain the acoustic engineering, the extraordinary stone transport, or the buried ceremonial boundary at Durrington Walls. Something had to coordinate all of it, and that raises the harder, more contested question archaeologists are still actively arguing about today. Who had the power to build this? The scale of what's now been documented, the Durrington shaft ring, the acoustic engineering, the maritime transport of multi-ton stones across hundreds of kilometers, the astronomical precision spanning generations, challenges older, more romantic pictures of Stonehenge as a purely voluntary, egalitarian community project. It's worth being fair to both sides of this debate because archaeologists genuinely disagree. Mike Parker Pearson, who led the major Stonehenge Riverside Project excavations at Durrington Walls in the 2000s, found evidence there of massive seasonal feasting, cattle and pig bones in enormous quantities, arriving from across Britain, suggesting large communal gatherings that some researchers read as evidence of cooperative, voluntary participation rather than coerced labor, a kind of prehistoric mass mobilization built on shared belief rather than centralized command. Other researchers, pointing to the sheer coordination required, sourcing stone from 3 separate, distant regions, transporting 6-ton blocks by sea, maintaining consistent architectural and astronomical planning across many centuries of rebuilding, argue that this level of sustained, precise coordination is difficult to explain without some form of centralized authority or a specialized class capable of directing labor and preserving technical knowledge across generations. Neither position is proven beyond doubt, and archaeologists are honest about that uncertainty. What is well documented is that no large permanent settlement matching the scale of the construction workforce has ever been found immediately surrounding Stonehenge itself, though Durrington Walls, just 2 miles away, does show substantial evidence of a large, seasonally occupied settlement, likely housing workers and pilgrims during construction phases, based on Parker Pearson's excavations. Whether that reflects free communities gathering by choice, a ruling elite commanding tribute and labor, or, as is probably most likely, some combination that shifted over the many centuries Stonehenge was built, and conclusion in either direction. What the acoustic, geological, and astronomical evidence does support, without needing to resolve that debate, is this. Whoever organized this construction possessed knowledge of sound, stone sourcing, and celestial mechanics that operated at a level of sophistication earlier generations of archaeologists consistently underestimated. What we're still learning. Put all of it together, and the honest picture is more remarkable than the version we were taught in school, without needing exaggeration to make it so. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry revealed a Durrington Walls shaft ring likely dating to around 2400 BC, among the largest prehistoric monuments ever documented in Britain, whose exact purpose is still being actively researched. The survey that found it, the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes Project, scanned roughly 12 square kilometers of the surrounding countryside between 2010 and 2014 without lifting a single spade of turf, a scale of non-invasive coverage that would have been technically impossible even a generation earlier, when geophysical survey equipment could only realistically manage a few hectares at a time. Acoustic modeling by Trevor Cox's team at Salford confirmed, through rigorous published testing, that the stone circle created a measurably different sound environment than the surrounding landscape. A reverberation time of roughly 2/3 of a second, close to what you'd find in a small modern concert hall built entirely from the geometry of standing rock. The more provocative infrasound and emotion theory, meanwhile, remains a genuine hypothesis still being investigated, not an established fact. It's worth remembering that this caution cuts both ways in archaeology. The same discipline that once dismissed astronomical alignments as fringe speculation has also, at times, been too quick to declare a mystery solved. The honest through line at Stonehenge is that both instincts have been wrong before, which is exactly why every claim here is worth weighing against what's actually been published and replicated, not just what makes the better headline. Geochemical dating by Anthony Clark's team at Curtin University proved in 2024 that the altar stone traveled over 700 kilometers from northeastern Scotland, almost certainly by sea, rewriting decades of assumptions about Neolithic maritime capability. That finding alone forced a quiet re-examination of other British megalithic sites once assumed to be purely local affairs. If a 6-ton block could move by sea from Scotland to Wiltshire around 2600 BC, researchers are now asking what else in the archaeological record has been too quickly assumed to be locally sourced. And astronomical research, building on work stretching back to see Newham's original alignment surveys in the 1960s and refined since by archaeoastronomers like Clive Ruggles, continues to reveal how deeply solar and lunar cycles were built into the monument's design, not as a single burst of insight, but as knowledge clearly accumulated, tested, and passed down across many generations of builders. What Professor Gaffney and his colleagues have been careful to say in the years since the Hidden Landscapes survey was published isn't that Stonehenge hides some deliberately encoded warning for the future. It's something more grounded and arguably more interesting, that for 3 centuries, researchers studied a fraction of what was actually there, and that non-invasive technology, radar, isotope mass spectrometry, acoustic modeling, is now letting us ask better questions of a monument that has kept most of its landscape hidden the entire time. The questions that remain open. For all that's been settled, it's worth being honest about how much hasn't been. The Durrington shaft ring is a genuine, dated, published discovery, but its function is still argued over in the literature, with proposals ranging from a ritual boundary marking sacred ground to a practical means of channeling sound or movement, to something more mundane like a series of quarry or resource pits later reinterpreted ceremonially. No excavation has yet produced a smoking gun artifact that settles the question either way, and researchers involved in the original 2020 publication have been careful to present it as their leading interpretation rather than a proven conclusion. The maritime transport theory for the altar stone faces its own unresolved puzzle. No Neolithic seagoing vessel capable of carrying a 6-ton load has ever been recovered anywhere in Britain, which means the theory currently rests on the geological evidence for where the stone came from and the practical improbability of overland transport, rather than on any physical boat or dock. Some researchers have raised an alternative worth taking seriously: that Ice Age glacial movement, not human effort, may have carried certain stones part of the distance millennia before Stonehenge was ever built, with human builders only needing to move them the final stretch. This glacial transport theory remains a minority position among specialists studying the blue stones, but it hasn't been fully ruled out, and it's a useful reminder that how did they move it doesn't always have a single tidy answer. There's also a broader debate about population and continuity that rarely makes it into popular retellings. Ancient DNA studies published in Nature in 2018 revealed that the population of Britain was almost completely replaced by new migrants associated with the Bell Beaker culture within a few centuries of Stonehenge's main construction phases, meaning the descendants of the people who likely built the monument's final sarsen phase were largely displaced not long after. Whatever institutional knowledge, oral tradition, or priesthood once explained Stonehenge's purpose may not have survived intact into the very cultures who continued using the site. That single genetic finding complicates any theory that assumes a single continuous authority controlled the monument's meaning across its many centuries of active use, which stretched, according to the current archaeological consensus, from around 3000 BC through to roughly 1600 BC. The stones themselves haven't changed in 5,000 years. What's changed is our ability to actually listen to what they've been telling us all along. And every new survey season still turns up something nobody expected. Just in the past decade, that's meant a buried monument the size of a small town, a stone proven to have crossed the length of Britain by sea, and a population history far more turbulent than anyone assumed when the first solstice alignment was noted centuries ago. If this deep dive into what's actually been proven about Stonehenge, and what's still genuinely being debated, changed how you think about it, subscribe for more of the real research behind our most famous ancient monuments. The past wasn't primitive. It was, provably, far more sophisticated than we gave it credit for, and we're still only partway through figuring out exactly how.